Every rare once in a while, a game forces its way out of the abandonware graveyard. Think Duke Nukem Forever, Dead Island 2, Hytale, and while you're thinking about them, maybe ignore how good they ended up being and be amazed that they were released at all. Routine is one of those miracle zombie games. It was first teased back in August of 2012. The best and only K-pop song hits the scene, Hurricane Sandy hits the eastern seaboard, and the first trailer for Routine hits Gamescom. It looks great, sounds amazing, and promises a unique horror setting we hadn't seen before. I mean, horror in space? They broke new ground is all I'm saying. 4 years pass, radio silence, then boom. New trailer, new release date, the atmosphere's still there. It looks like they've been cooking. They offer a release date of March 2017. March 2017 rolls around. Nothing. 8 years pass. We get another release date, another trailer, new art direction, somehow better audio, and it actually drops? Routine released December 4th, 2025 after 13 years in development limbo, and no one seems to notice. No fanfare, no crazy ad campaign, nothing. So naturally, I feel like there has to be a catch. There has to be something wrong with it. When a horror game pulls these kind of numbers, when it doesn't get much attention from big YouTubers who eat linear horror games for breakfast, when it's taken this long to come out, it's usually a pretty safe bet that it's not as good as the advertisement makes it out to be. Except, it is. Routine is great. It's dripping in atmosphere, tense, terrifying, slow, fast, gorgeous, ugly, and most importantly, an Unreal Engine game. Ignoring any qualms I may have with Unreal Engine 5's less savory effects on the gaming landscape, thanks to a brilliant modder by the name of Praydog, when I see this splash screen, I have one simple thought. I can play you in VR. And then I sit there a little longer and think, oh god, I can play you in VR. Playing an Unreal Engine game in VR through the Unreal Engine VR Injector, or UEVR for short, isn't as simple as playing a game made with VR in mind. UEVR does the complicated backend stuff to display Unreal Engine games in your headset. Then it pretty much leaves the rest up to you. It does offer a mountain of settings that can be tweaked to make games play better in VR, but depending on the title, it can take a lot of work to make a game feel like a native VR experience. Routine is one of those games that takes a bit of tweaking. Without any changes, you're not going to have a good VR experience. Lunar Software, the developers behind Routine, have a distinct vision for how they want Routine to look. There's heavy film grain, a fisheye effect, and an intense sharpening filter that gives the original flat screen version a distinctly grimy, cinematic look that we have to strip back for VR. Once you've downloaded a mod that lets you peel back some of the visual style, you're still left with a broken VR experience. Your head's decoupled from your body, cutscenes play in the center of your screen but let you get a peek at your shiny crotch, and in-engine cutscenes whip your view around like they're trying to make you sick. I went into this challenge thinking I could tweak a few basic settings and have a passable VR experience. That didn't happen. You spend a good amount of time looking at and navigating screens in this game, and it turned out, moving the cursor also moved the camera. In a flat screen game, this isn't a big deal. In VR, it sucks. That, comboed with the lack of motion controls, meaning my hands were stuck at my side, you can kind of see where my left hand should be thanks to the performance overlay I use in VR, kicked me out of VR and onto the Flat2VR Discord. There I found a profile, which is essentially a bundled bunch of tweaks that can be shared between UEVR users that let me piggyback off of more patient people's work. This profile got rid of my body, which I wasn't using anyways, tied the tool I'd soon use for the rest of the game to my hand, and most importantly decoupled the cursor from my head and coupled it to my hand. With all that sorted, I churned through the tutorial that teaches you how to lean around corners with controls, which is unnecessary in VR, and ran into the first gameplay related roadblock of the run. Outside of VR, you grab your ID like you grab any item in any game. You aim the center of your view at it and click. Grabbing the ID with invisible hands and no cursor proved a tad bit more difficult. I tried clicking on it for a short while, took a moment to grab my helmet and get a glimpse at the title of the first chapter, and took another whack at the card. I tried my controller, I tried my mouse, and eventually had a eureka moment where I traced the cursor from the monitor right next to the card to the card itself. With my ID in hand, I ran into the second roadblock of the run. First, I'll let this excellent bit of sound design play out. And point out, for those of you who didn't notice or aren't watching this video with headphones, that audio is not tied to my head. I can look around freely like I would in any other VR game, but the audio engine itself only sees the invisible player model's position when it sorts out how and where to play 3D audio. This wasn't necessarily a deal breaker, it just meant I had to use my controller to rotate around more than my head. But it would come back to bite me in the ass later on in the run. Finally, with all that yapping and explaining and demonstrating, we can get on to the challenge itself. Routine is set on the moon. You don't get much time to let that fact sink in before a speaker sends you off to a meeting room named after the greatest steak sauce of all time. Before I can move on with the saucy intro, I had to get rid of this annoying UI message. Since most, if not all, VR controllers lack a D-pad, I had to break the fourth wall, grab my Xbox controller, plug that bitch in, all to press a single button. After that, I got my hands, or should I say hand, on the Cosmonaut Assistance tool. One victim of Routine's VR translation is the clunky way you interact with the cat. Having to switch between modules mid-run for your life is an awesome way to force you to slow to a crawl and make split-second decisions in the middle of a chase. It's peak horror game design. In VR, you interact with the cat with an almost equally cumbersome laser pointer, but you do lose some of that tension. After grabbing the cat, I encountered an elevator locked out by a 4-digit code. I considered brute forcing the combo until I remembered the cat's database. With the elevator code, I was able to open the elevator and get a look behind the game's curtain you never see on the flat screen. Normally, when this little loading screen pops up, it hides a change in level. In VR, that illusion is broken. I got to use my cat for the first time, marveled at the purdy particle effects, and opened the path to the tram station. I got the vibe that I was supposed to shut down
We need to shut down the ASN.
something, and wondered who I was to contact to initiate said shutdown.
Kay's your only shot. Find her. Shut it down.
I hopped onto a seedy tram, figured I would have better luck finding Kay in the living quarters, and was hit with yet another roadblock. As a resident of the ASN, you're supposed to use the code on your ID badge to gain access to the living quarters. The issue is, with the UEVR profile I was using, I could not see my chest. I ended up reloading the game, looking at my chest, and re-injecting UEVR all without leaving VR, technically maintaining the integrity of the challenge. I couldn't say the same for the integrity of my shorts when I met Routine's first freaky-ass killer robot. As you can see from the footage, I was literally shaking from this first interaction. I didn't do myself any favors by immediately cornering myself, nor did I unpucker my anus until my robot friend lost track of me and gave me a moment to catch my breath. I read some lore, totally didn't get scared again, and tried and failed to pull a fast one with the door. I must not have learned my lesson, because my second failed attempt at closing the door in its face went even worse than the first. The freaky clinker manhandled my ass, and to add insult to injury, made me sniff his robo-gooch. My third attempt at slamming a door in his face worked. Until it did not. Not one to abandon a losing tactic, I closed the door on his bitch ass for the fourth time and used a few seconds of peace to track down Kay's living quarters. I got a closer look at a decommissioned Type 5 before his decommissioned brother chased my ass into a squeaky crawl space. After finding the code to a door blocking my progression, one of the missing residents of the ASN perfectly described playing Routine in VR.
Headaches, eye strain, the usual.
Just about the time I learned my lesson on closing or failing to close doors in a clanker's face, I descended the scariest VR staircase I'd seen since Resident Evil 7 and found another decommissioned Tony Robo just outside Kay's domicile. I caught the last minutes of a creepypasta, read a helpful note, and found Kay's keycard. After almost losing my cool, a door finally closed permanently mid-chase, with me on the wrong side. It's funny, watching this footage back now, I'm struck by how VR manages to make bog standard horror tropes like being chased by an unkillable enemy scary again. Since the laundry room robo didn't scare me the second time, the game tested my ticker a different way. After one final touch of auditory anguish, I rode the elevator back up to the security shutoff terminal and discovered that I still had one code to go. I had Kay's ID card for verification, but I lacked an access code. For that, I needed to visit the mall, which is where I met IC. Who welcomed me to the mall. Despite IC's warm welcome, logging into the mall turned into yet another pain in the tuchus. I had to jump through the same hoops to see the keycard on my chest, hop back into VR and log in, all for IC to give me more bad news. He led me to an ominous red room with an ominous red ladder that led to an ominous red door. Clearly, the Type 5s missed me, judging by how badly they wanted to hug me when they saw me again. This entire section, the mall, its various stores and halls, were the most immersive environments I visited in VR. I wanted nothing more than to take my time and soak in the atmosphere. Routine's 70s futurism is up there with the greats. The Type 5s had other plans. I was momentarily distracted by your mother's favorite arcade cabinet before I opened a gate between me and my goal. Just about the time the Type 5 shtick was wearing thin, when their scare factor was at an all-time low, I encountered a truly horrifying sight. The aftermath of bot-on-bot violence. Moving on, I got my hands on a new module for the cat, the UltraView module. This module let me see substances that only showed under ultraviolet light. By this point, I'd mastered the Type 5's patterns. The rest of this section consisted of me solving a few more puzzles, getting jump scared by cutscenes with invisible animations, and IC abuse that damn near broke my heart. After one last mad dash from the mall, and one last successful door closing, I stumbled on a depressing sight, and used the UltraView module to wake one of the last surviving ICs on the moon. Chapter 3 began on an encouraging note. I found a tape that perfectly summarized my opinion on Routine's visuals.
It's beautiful.
And began the lengthy process of shutting down the ASN. A big red ball screeched at me, revealed a smaller, wider ball that almost crashed my game, and transported me to a fishy dream sequence that capped off the shortest chapter of the game. As we move into Chapter 4, Narration Nerd needs to step out for a moment and Editing Nerd needs to share a quick apology. Performance in this section was a bit choppy, and the footage I captured for this video suffered as a result. I tried to keep clips with choppier low frame rates to a minimum while editing, but there were some sequences I couldn't in good conscience edit out. If you're prone to motion sickness and made it this far into the video, thanks for toughing it out. Perhaps as a smelly harbinger of things to come, I noticed an ominous splotch of what appeared to be shitty caca poo-poo. Not one to flee from a shitty situation, I found a new interface module for my cat next to a note that said not to aim it at a person's eyes. That, coupled with diary entries that mentioned a tall creature that could only be seen through the module, started me down a long and winding path of paranoia. I found a video diary that confirmed the authenticity of the shitty caca poo-poo pile and hinted at future shitty caca poos to come. The diaries, coupled with a note mentioning a specimen and a discouraging tape recording,
Do bear in mind, he observes us as well.
led me to a server room that smelled, not so nice. Ignoring the fact that VR cannot simulate smells and that the shitty caca poo-poo smell I was picking up on might have belonged to my VR den, I tackled a simple puzzle. Solving the puzzle was a breeze. The game whipping my view around and blasting my ears with the most terrifying sound I've ever heard was less breezy. The buildup of tension until this elevator ride was exquisite, and the payoff left me shaking in my grippy socks. This next section is why I threw that message up at the beginning. You know, the one about headphones. It seemed I was not alone. I got my first good glimpse at Entity A hiding in a closet, and soon found myself in the scariest game I've ever played. Ever. In and out of VR. You see, like the diary mentioned before, Entity A could turn invisible. When he was invisible, I could only see him through my cat module, which meant I had to clear every corner like a Navy SEAL watching a teeny tiny movie on a teeny tiny CRT. After a tactical retreat to a safe room, I successfully activated an archive terminal that gave me a code for a locker that just so happened to be in the footpath of the entity. An unfortunate side effect of Routine's VR conversion was how janky I found punching codes into physical keypads. The jank, comboed with the entity's habit of pulling up on me like a slightly less hot version of Invisigal, made something as simple as opening a locker not so simple. What really sucked, watching this footage back as I edit, was realizing I could have just looked to the cat's display to see what button I was about to press. I was focused on the tiny white dot that showed up intermittently on the numbers themselves when I had a literal screen displaying exactly where I was pointing. When I finally opened the locker, I was greeted with a cipher that I imagine would have been much easier to tackle outside of VR. I had to match symbols on the front of a tiny paper to numbers on the back, and use photographs of locations around the area to find the symbols themselves. If I'd gone through this section on a flat screen, I could have kept track of the symbols on a scrap of paper or my phone. Playing in VR without outside aids heightened the dread building throughout this section to Taj Mahalian heights. With the symbols collected, I flipped between the tiny pages and sussed out the code to the bathroom's keypad. With the bathroom's gate unlocked, I started a series of visual and auditory evaluations, all the while wondering why the entity had grown so silent. The visual test went by without a hitch. I wish I could say the same for the auditory test. After draining a basin, I memorized yet another code, upgraded my security clearance, and got spawn camped by the entity. Luckily, I only died to it once, since I'm such a pro, elite epic gamer who totally didn't get misled by the mismatched directional audio. I think the entity and I were starting to warm up to each other. He followed me all the way out of the archives, and I couldn't bring myself to leave without taking a few pictures to remember him by. A hop, skip, and a jump later, I used my new security status to leave the entity behind and had one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in VR. The scale and silence of the moon is impossible to properly sell through recording. But, man, I would kill for a VR game set on the moon. I feel like you could do some interesting shit with the setting since sound doesn't travel in space and VR is already so isolating. On the other side of the moonwalk, I encountered the sacred door of choppy framerate, the not-so-sacred shitty caca poo-poo fungal growth man, and a brain scan of you, dear viewer. I then found a monitor that warned me of an overabundance of shitty caca poo-poo in the cistern, entered a quiet, peaceful little lunchroom, and found yet another terminal needing a 4-digit code. There was an ID badge sitting on a table in the little cafeteria, so I grabbed it without anything going awry. The terminal I unlocked spoke of natives on the moon and sent me on an errand for a decontaminant for this spindly stuff growing out of bodies. Creating the decontaminant ended up being a simple logic puzzle, and finding a combo of ingredients to kill the alien growths gave me hope that I might just get off the moon alive. After decontamination and that, I found the code that gave me access to the cistern. One YY ladder stall later, I stepped down into the mother of all shitty caca poo poo stains and saw a most welcome sight. So far, valves have never failed me, and I had a good feeling about this one. In a bold stroke of social commentary from the developers, the game randomly inserted a live feed of my local Planned Parenthood before depositing me at the base of yet another shitty caca poo poo hall. All that running built up quite a thirst in me, so I topped up on some grade A Aquafina straight from the source before being comforted by schizo encouragements beamed straight into my neocortex.
Don't give up.
I was glad to finally be rid of the entity as I ascended to the surface of the moon, until an unwelcome thought entered my mind. None of the terminal entries or interactions with the entity proved that it could not survive in the vacuum of space. Thanks to that little brain worm, my second trip to the moon's surface was decidedly less magical. I entered Routine's 6th chapter with my hackles well risen and a level 3 security access. I was in the endgame now, and as you'll soon hear, I was about ready to be done with the whole ordeal.
Clip that.
With the ward's systems finally reset, I was free to run down even more cramped hallways and windy hallways and meat, fungus, pile hallways before being treated to yet another encouraging message from one of the voices in my head. Since my PC didn't seem to like this entire last section, I took a moment to diagnose my frame time issues and the safety of my After giving my heart a chance to crawl down out of my throat, I took one last look at the average iPad baby 30 years from now before getting blued by the last stretch of the game. And just like that, I answered the question posed at the beginning of this video. Yes, you can beat Routine in VR. Mucho thanko to everyone still watching at this point. I know I've been absent for a while, and I know viewer retention tends to drop into the single digits after the first 3 minutes on damn near every video on this site. So if you're still here, thank you. And if you don't mind, I have a favor to ask. If you didn't feel inclined to comment anything as the video went on, maybe comment something completely unrelated to this video and its premise to confuse those who come after you. And to help with the algorithm. I got a closer look at a decommissioned Type 5 before his decommissioned brother chased my ass into a squeaky scroll. The jank comboed with the entity's habit of and ran into the first gameplay related blip. Drink.